annual Gilberto Castaneda lecture. Thank you for your presence and support. I want to introduce to you Reverend Ronna Case and Dr. Ted Jennings, please wave, who established the Gilberto Castaneda Award in 1994. You will hear from Reverend Case shortly. I also want to acknowledge that we have some alums from Chicago Theological Seminary here. Please wave. Yay for our alums. Thank you for being here, for your continuing engagement with this community, and I'm thankful to see faculty and staff and students here, as well as some guests from the Chicagoland area. We're glad that you're here this evening as we all look forward to hearing our speaker. I want to take just a quick moment to thank those of you who worked really hard to make this evening happen. Ken Stone, Kim Johnson, Scott Haldeman, Susan Kusick, Angela Parker, Britt Cox, and our fabulous facilities folks, Jay Soon, Cooper, Josh, and Kirk. We look forward to the inspiration from a fabulous lecture, good conversation, as we all strive to find the love of God that is so compelling as it was for Gilberto, so that we will flourish as leaders who bring forth that divine love. So welcome. We're glad you're here. And now please stand, turn to hymn number 20, and join in singing God of Abraham and Sarah.
Good evening. Once again, it is my privilege to give a brief introduction of Gilberto Castaneda, who lived from 1965 to 1994. Have you known someone who has been assaulted simply because they were gay or lesbian living in a homophobic society? Perhaps you have been. You know someone who's been murdered or who has committed suicide because they were gay or lesbian, living in a homophobic society. I do. Ted has just written a short memorial for friends in Korea following the suicide of Yok Woon-dang. Find it on Facebook if you wish. As I begin tonight, I would like to quote briefly from Ted's comments, and I quote, "Only when our voices are united in love for all the children of our nations will this terrible violence come to an end. That is why it is so important to make clear in all areas of society that homophobia must cease. Homophobia is not a personal option. Homophobia is not a cultural tradition. Homophobia is not a religious teaching. Homophobia is murder. Por la lucha, for the struggle for life and freedom against homophobia, here is a tiny version of Gilberto's story. In 1991, Gil wrote a farewell note to his tocayo, his namesake, Gilberto Amaro, the young Mexican Methodist pastor who'd come to work with me and who'd met him with friendship and the gospel in a small farm town near Bakersfield, California. This is what he said in farewell. "I am guilty of wanting everything to be fantastic and full of color in this my new life. But what I know for sure is that the connection between love, friendship, and brotherhood will always exist in the world and in my life." 3 years later, we had to say hasta la próxima, until the next time, to Gilberto at Northwestern Hospital here in Chicago. It was Ibrahim who carried him down the 3 flights of stairs from our home as we took him to Northwestern. In Ibrahim's strong arms, Gil was a pale, twiggy version of himself without the strength to hold on. We were stunned and so grateful that Ibrahim offered to carry him. Handsome and healthy, nervous and morbidly afraid of illness, this Muslim man from Senegal was filled with compassion and a sense of freedom because of what he'd seen of Gil's dignity and his faith. And he offered to carry him, like, he's not heavy, he's my brother. When we met in 1989, Gilberto was an attractive, healthy-looking young man with short brown hair and big brown eyes. He loved riding the scariest rides at any amusement park. He loved having his picture taken, and he loved dressing up de modo in the latest style, buying a few nice things on his shoestring budget. He also loved singing corritos of praise and longing to God in Methodist churches and decorating for holidays. Oh, he loved that. He loved to da la vida to the house, a la casa, to give life to the house. He had the spiritual gifts of hospitality, helping, friendship, and faith. When he first came over the border, he worked long hours bagging carrots and washing dishes in restaurants in Bakersfield, California. He was an economic refugee, and he was an emotional refugee. He had struggled alone, in silence, against the soul-ravaging culture of homophobia in Mexico and had suffered a sexual assault by a teacher when he had attended a seminary-track Catholic school there. He lived around and with us for 2 years and then came to Chicago when we did in 1991 when we came back. He quickly became active at John Huss United Methodist Church in the Pilsen and at Crossroads House, which was a center that existed then for international students here at University of Chicago. Gilberto couldn't cook very well, but he could set a beautiful table. And whenever he played his guitar, every song had the same rhythm, and the rest of us just played around it. He never got to attend seminary, although he did become part of the CTS community. He worked in maintenance, and he painted Susan Thistlethwaite's house. And the guitar that Dow Edgerton gave him was his second most prized possession. The first was his Bible. He felt that grateful to have been found by God's saving love. Gilberto returned to Mexico in 1992 to help his mother move and to try to finish college. Later, he moved to Atlanta for a relationship that became deadly toxic with a policeman, a Baptist deacon, who did not help him when he began to become sick. He returned to our home in early August 1994, carrying his Bible and his guitar, suffering full-blown, untreated AIDS infections. Despite wonderful help from Howard Brown Center and Northwestern Hospital, medical intervention came too late. Ted was with him constantly. During his last 3 weeks of life, we were together listening, talking, doing nursing care, and singing love songs to God. Gilberto wanted so much to live as a gay man and a Christian, self-accepting and free. He wanted to use his gifts for God's agenda. But he died on August 29th, 1994. I'd say homophobia killed him. Later in November, Susan worked with Dow and others, and the Gilberto Castaneda Scholarship was announced. For these years now, since then, it has provided a little encouragement and support to outstanding GLBTQ students at CTS. It has honored also Jesus Christ, the Lord of hospitality, by remembering one who could easily be forgotten, who was salt of the earth, one of the least of these. Thank you for your support. Gilberto Castaneda, presente.
Thank you, Rana. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news and curing every disease and every sickness. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to the disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask our God, source and sustainer of the harvest, to send laborers into the fields." Such is the reason for this night, this annual celebration of the work of queer religious studies at this small and daring seminary. To remind ourselves of the teeming crowds of those who are harassed, those in need of help and healing, in need of good news. And to hear again some good news to us, and the call to go from this place out into the fields, the highways and byways, where the discarded and the downtrodden wander. And to be about the identification of still more laborers who need their call affirmed, who need education and challenge, who will go and serve far beyond these walls, far beyond our imaginings. Here at CTS, my colleagues and I, who read texts and traditions queerly, who construct inclusive theologies, who contribute to the struggle for justice for those who are marginalized because of their gender presentation, because of their orientation of their desire, because of their choice of loves and lovers. Do this work both for and with our students as one part of how we all strive to fulfill the mission, vision, and commitments of Chicago Theological Seminary. And so this scholarship, and so this annual night of conversation and celebration and insight. As you've heard, this scholarship was established in 1994 in loving memory of Gilberto Castaneda. You'll see on your program a quote from Ted, which reads, "Gilberto was one of the people it would be easy to overlook. In honoring the memory of one of the least of these, CTS also honors our common Lord." That this is the first scholarship in a mainline seminary directed to gay and lesbian students is especially meaningful, not only because Gilberto was a dedicated lay minister, but also because his dream was one day to prepare himself for ordained ministry. It is my honor and privilege this night to name the 2013-14 Gilberto Castaneda Scholar on behalf of CTS and our LGBTQ Religious Studies Center. But before I go there, I'd first like to ask any previous recipients of the scholarship to stand and be recognized. Thank you. This year's recipient comes to us from Austin, Texas. She is making her way on the long journey toward ordination in, of all things, the United Methodist Church. By way of things like summer camp and the Methodist student movement and the reconciling ministries and her current theological field education site, Holy Covenant Church, here in Chicago. She earned her BA with a double major in religious studies and communication from Southwestern University in 2007. She then served in 2 professional positions. First at Life Steps Council, where she organized support groups to help prevent at-risk youth from lives of substance abuse. And second at the Williamson County Crisis Center, where she continues to provide education, advocacy, and support to prevent family, sexual, and other forms of intimate violence. As part of our review of recent Midler MDiv students, she writes, "I plan to become an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and to serve a congregation that is committed to being a presence of justice and mercy to each other, to the community, and to the world. I hope to continue working towards full inclusion of LGBTQ persons in both lay and clergy in the Methodist Church. And I also plan on working with intentional communities that are centered around service, worship, and ministry in order to build an innovative presence of the good news within the communities that they serve. For all she has done, for all she promises to do, for the call she follows, though the road may not always be clear, I am happy to name Britt Cox, the 2013-14 Castaneda Scholar at Chicago Theological Seminary. Finally, another reason we hold these annual Castaneda letters is to celebrate the presence of openly LGBTQ persons in the total life of the seminary. And so the churches, those who must be resilient, courageous, and committed to work in the realm of religion, theology, and ministry. Such persons here are students, faculty, staff, trustees, and friends of CTS. We honor you all. And so we ask self-identified queer folk to stand. And so we ask our allies, which I trust means most everybody here, to stand as well and recognize and celebrate all of our contributions to the increase of justice and mercy in the world, and for your willingness to join in the harvest of joy. Thank you. And I invite our current Castaneda scholar to lead us in a prayer of invocation.
Divine of many names, voices, embraces and sounds, goddess of wisdom, love and laughter, spirit of light. Talk to us while we are together tonight. Whisper to us your hidden wonders. Smile at us. Make us question what it means to breathe this air. Show to us the new angles and ages of life. Walk with us to life. Divine of many names, many faces, voices, and sounds. Bring us together to share your wisdom, love, laughter, and light. Amen.
Sim shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu. Ve'akol Yisrael amecha. Sim, sim, sim shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Sim, sim, sim shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, aleinu v'akol Yisrael amecha. Sim, sim, sim shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Barhenu avinu kulanu kechad, be'or panecha. Ki vior panecha. Ki vior panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Torat chaim ve'ahavat chesed u'tzedaka u'veracha v'rachamim v'chaim v'shalom v'shalom. Sim, sim shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Sim, shalom, tova, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל ישראל. עמך שים, שים, שים שלום, טובה, טובה וברכה. ברכנו אבינו כולנו כאחד באור פניך. וטוב בניך לברך, לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה ובכל שעה בשלומך. וטוב בניך לברך, לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
Good evening. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to acknowledge and honor the long witness of Ted Jennings and Ronna Case to the good news of inclusion and the resistance to homophobia and ecclesial heterosexism that they have embodied in their lives, their ministries, and their queer households over many years at CTS. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's Castaneda lecturer. Noach Dezmura is a graduate of the Richard Denner Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, and he continues to work in the GTU as an adjunct instructor, director of educational technology, and executive assistant to the provost at Starr King School for the Ministry. He's also an adjunct instructor for the SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice at the University of San Francisco, and director of the nonprofit Jewish Transitions. Noach is the winner of a Lambda Literary Award for Balancing on the Makitza, Transgender in Jewish Community, which he edited for North Atlantic Books. And I just hit your keyboard. I first met Noach in 2010 when we worked together on a team of LGBTQ scholars to organize the first Summer Institute for Religious and Theological Study for the Human Rights Campaign at Vanderbilt Divinity School. A number of CTS community members have participated in the Summer Institute, including last year's Castaneda scholar Esther Baruha. Noach shared some of his research then on Jewish burial societies and transgender bodies, and tonight he's going to be speaking with us further on the topic, Dying Real, Jewish Burial Customs and Gender Variant Bodies. So please join me in welcoming Noach to CTS.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate the invitation. And thank you, President Hunt, wherever you are. There you are. I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. I want to let people know that I'm hard of hearing. So if someone has a comment or something, please feel free, but it may take me several tries to hear you. First, I want to get us a little bit in the mood. Not that mood.
Oh, what is this that I can't see with icy hands takes hold on me? I am death, none can excel. I hold the key to heaven or hell. Oh, death, won't you spare me, Lord, on another year? Oh, I have come to get your soul, leave your body and leave it cold. Drop the flesh right off of your frame, the earth and worms both have their play. Oh, death, won't you spare me, Lord, for another year? I'll lock your jaw so you can't talk. I'll freeze your limbs so you can't walk. I'll shut your eyes so you can't see this very hour. Come go with me. Oh, death, won't you spare me over for another year? Oh, death, consider my age, but do not take me at this.
All right, that's a bit of that one. So the song for me is, it's really an experience of death in the body. That's what this lecture is all about. And just the other night, I found this one, which is, it's like the Jewish version of the same song, the Yiddish version of the same song. It isn't the same song, but the similarities are remarkable. I'm not an ethnomusicologist, but this is about bodies, and songs get you into bodies.
Spielt mir auf durch die Kolle, fahr mein Gesiese. Und spielt mir auf durch die Kolle, fahr mein Gesiese. Die alle
This was recorded in 1948.
Oh, du Rachmen, schoi chaim bim Räumen, wie
By an organization that's saving Yiddish culture. It's an alphabet song. It goes through the first few letters of the alphabet. All right, we've had a taste. So we're going to be talking about dying real. And what does it mean to die real when your tradition doesn't recognize who you are as real? So in Jewish tradition, it's customary to dedicate the merit of study, of text study, to someone who has passed on. And the idea is that your study helps their soul gain progress toward the divine. So the merit of our work together today is to those trans people who passed on before their bodies could be truly honored by their own tradition. Ken did a great introduction, and I'm thankful. There's number 3 in there that I wanted to hit on a little bit. I teach a course called Trans Theology at Star King, and it's about theologies that emerge from transgender embodiment, the theologies that arise from transgression and in interstitial spaces where many things are possible that are not otherwise possible. So we're going to talk a little bit about who the Jews are and where they are in the world and in the United States. And then we're going to talk a little bit, that's really brief. We're just going to go like lightning at 100,000 feet. And we're going to talk about gender in Judaism, what social roles are played by people of different genders. And then we're going to talk a little bit about gender in Jewish texts. And specifically how gender variance is, there's precedent for gender variance in Hebrew text. And then we're going to talk about how trans Jews fare in a binary gender system, because you can't really do anything in Jewish without being male or female. We're going to talk about Jewish law, or halakha, and the stances of the various strands of Jewish law and how they deal with people who are transsexual, transgender, or gender non-normative. And then finally, we're going to conclude with Jewish burial customs. And given that whole setup of gender and the rigidity of that system and some of the tradition that has shored up the tradition for so long, some of the history that shored up the tradition for so long, and then what people are doing today to reclaim some of the old and innovate and make Jewish tradition, to renew Jewish tradition. And then we're going to wrap it up a little bit. So where are the Jews, first of all? This is the 30,000 or 100,000 foot thing. So there are about 13 million Jews in the world. And there's 2 large population centers. One is Israel and one is the United States. There's about the same amount in Israel and the United States. They kind of go back and forth. Israel actually just like very recently hit the 6 million mark, which is significant because 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. In America, the 5.5 million Jews comprise 2% of the American religious landscape. So most Jews are assimilated into American culture. So when we talk about American Judaism, there are, in Christian tradition, there are denominations. In Jewish tradition, we call the differences between various ways of practicing Judaism, not necessarily believing, because believing is less important than practicing, doing in Judaism. We call them streams or movements. And the biggest division is due to the stance on Jewish law, or halakha. So Orthodox Jews their lives are regulated by Jewish law, and they adhere strictly to a long tradition of interpretation of Jewish law. And in the more liberal areas of Judaism, there's less of a close relationship. Conservative Judaism has its own halakhic system. It's the same halakhic system, but their own ways of interpreting the law. In the Reform movement, which is the most well-known, the most well-known liberal tradition, Jewish law has a voice but not a veto. So we refer to the law, but we don't necessarily let it stop us from accommodating lives in the present day. The next reason for differences is the authority that is recognized. And in all traditions, there is a head of household kind of authority, but it matters less in conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism, where the sexes are treated more egalitarianly. In Orthodox tradition, the head of the household has authority over the way Jewish lives are conducted within that household. And then the third reason is the adherence to mitzvot, or the level of observance. In Orthodox homes, the idea is that more of the 613 mitzvot are practiced on a regular basis. And in conservative and reform, in conservative you may have the same number of practices as an Orthodox person, but your way of interpreting or understanding those traditions is different. In a reform setting, you're going to have a lot less of what we understand as traditional practice. So the population that we're mostly concerned with then are the conservative and reform, or the more liberal or progressive, depending on how you define those words, branches of Judaism, and some of the Orthodox population. In the gray area up to the upper left, that quarter of the population are not much concerned with Jewish ritual and have pretty much assimilated into the culture. So we're talking probably about 50% of all Jews have some connection, some like limited connection to the tradition, and 50% not so much and wouldn't be concerned so much about burial. So this is really, really speculative, and I have down here, please don't cite this. I have used some estimates of how many male to female transsexuals there are who have received surgery, then someone extrapolated those and said, well, okay, this many have received surgery, so there must be this many, who haven't received surgery. And, it's like flying, it's very loose. So one person who has a very liberal kind of estimate says 1 in every 1,000 men has a desire to have a sex change, and a much more conservative estimate says 1 in every 30,000. And I split the difference, and I said, okay, 1 in 15,000. It's a thing. It's a number. Okay, and it used to be that about 1/3 of the number of transsexuals, male to female, was actually the number of FTMs, female to male transsexuals. Like 1/3 of the total number of, does that make sense? 3 times as many trans women as there are trans men, but the more access there is to surgery and hormones, the more those numbers are balancing out. And so I just said 1 in 15,000 for MTFs and 1 in 15,000 for FTMs. Okay, but that's only transsexuals. That's people who want to have all of the surgery, or who want to conform in their gender identity to the sex into which they are transitioning. Does that make sense? Tell me if I lose you. Okay. The next layer down the pyramid is transgender, which is an umbrella that contains many different kinds of embodiment and gender expression. And I used just my own kind of experience, like participating in this community, reading about this community, studying about this community, but there are no numbers. So, this is just, I said, there's probably about 10 times as many transgender identified people as there are transsexual identified people. And so that's how I got that number. And then for the genderqueer, that's even larger category of people who in some way are non-normative about their gender, sometimes or sometimes part of the time or all of the time. Maybe sometimes they feel like dressing up or embodying a different identity, where other people live a very fluid identity 100% of the time, and their identification is fluid or neutral or many other kinds of identifiers. Fairy can be a gender identity. Bear can be a gender identity. Queer can be a gender identity. And for as many people as there are terms for emerging gender identities. So 30 times the transgender number are genderqueer. And so if you look at that total, and this is of the progressive Jewish population, so looking at that number and totaling it all up, 87,000, that's a lot. Okay, but you know what this is worth? Okay, this is just to give us something to play with. Gender roles. This is just some quick pictures. When we think of Orthodox Jews, often we think of this. This is Hasidic Jews, a lot of Hasidic Jews in New York. They have particular kinds of clothing and very identifiable, modest clothing. And then this is also Orthodox, but modern Orthodox. So a different kind of Orthodoxy. And I have here a picture of a lesbian couple. Conservative Judaism is open to lesbian and gay marriage. And Reform, there's no costume differences that you can't really say, oh, well, that person's Reform just because of what they're wearing. But there's a lot of differences in Jews that are not necessarily, what kind of clothes you wear. And then Reconstructionist, I added this picture here because it's a little bit breaking with tradition to actually touch the Torah scroll. And it just gives an idea of what the Reconstructionist movement is about. It's a liberal denomination that is about cultural Judaism. And I'm using the word denomination, and I'm sorry, stream. And Jewish Renewal, which is the stream to which I belong, and it's the tiniest stream. It is unique in that it crosses all of the denomination or all of the streams. There are Orthodox people who are Jewish Renewal. There are conservative people who are Jewish Renewal. So it's kind of a hybrid of hybrids. So the Hebrew language is gendered. There's no way to say they as a gender-neutral pronoun. I mean, you probably could say they, but you wouldn't be able to identify a third gender using Hebrew. And technically, God has no gender, but there's a tradition in Torah to gender God male. The genders in synagogue, this would be the men and this would be the women in an Orthodox synagogue. In Orthodox communities, the genders are raised, socialized, little boys with little boys and little girls with little girls. And dating and sexuality are regulated and are part of marriage. There's an obligation to bear children. You don't wear clothing of the opposite sex. You can't render yourself sterile. Cosmetic surgery is you're not supposed to have that. Of course, a lot of people do. During marriage, the man and wife are separated during the time that the woman has her period. So men are obligated to the mitzvot. Their domain is the public sphere. Only men in Orthodox community may become rabbis. They are obligated to study Torah. They cannot be alone with a woman. I'm picking some of the major mitzvot, and then I'm kind of picking some that are relevant to transgender experience. And they have how their grooming is managed is mandated by halakha, and homosexuality and non-ordinary gender presentation are prohibited by Orthodox interpretations of Jewish law. Women are not obligated to perform what are called time-bound commandments, like prayer 3 times a day. But some commandments pertain only to women, and the 3 that I've illustrated in this picture are lighting the candles for Shabbat, making the challah, and doing a ritual bath in a mikveh after menstruation. She cannot be alone with a man, and her voice may not be heard in an Orthodox synagogue. It makes men think of something you shouldn't be, ostensibly. So gender equality in Orthodox communities is hard for the larger body of American Jews to stomach. The conservative and reform movement are much more egalitarian. And it's been argued in feminist circles that the things that you are prohibited from doing as a Jewish woman are the things that allow you to form a positive identity as a Jew. And therefore, how can women be expected to have a positive identity as a Jew if they can't do these things? So, in progressive branches of Judaism, of course, it's more egalitarian. Homosexuality and non-ordinary gender expressions are acceptable. And there's gay marriages, there's gay rabbis, and of course there's women rabbis. But egalitarian does not necessarily mean that they're ready to understand or embrace gender variance. In synagogue, you'll find gendered restrooms. You'll find that if a trans person wants to get married, that who they're marrying, what sex they are and what sex the person that they're marrying is, has to do with whether or not they'd be allowed in Jewish law. There's a heterosexual expectation, and so if you present as male, the idea would be that you date women, and the idea that you don't is you might bring it up and it wouldn't be a bad thing, but the expectation is heterosexuality. And even the most liberal synagogue, LGBTQ synagogue, has groups called brotherhoods and sisterhoods. Where would the trans person go? Would they be welcome if they went there? Could they go to both? Who knows? So, gender variance in a Jewish text, first in Torah and then in Mishnah. Rabbi Mark Samuth uses the Tetragrammaton, the name of God, Yud He Vav He in Hebrew letters. He makes a case that if you look at it in the other direction, it's if anybody remember their Hebrew, hey, vav, is who, which means he, and hey, yud, vowelized this way, is he, which is she. So God is he, she. The divine reflection is male and female. And then, of course, many of you may be familiar with the idea that Adam/Eve, the first being, was actually hermaphroditic. Genesis 1:27, the first being was one thing, and then God sliced that being in half, which is, kind of like the first divine sex reassignment surgery. And the sages use this to justify heterosexual marriage and to say that when a couple is married, they recomplete, they reconform to this dual gender ideal humanity. And at a workshop that I taught, one of the an Orthodox rabbi in the audience surprised me completely by saying a transgender person who embodies male and female in themselves is a more accurate or more complete representation of B'Tselem Elohim, the divine image, than someone who is cisgender or single gender without transition. Yes. All right. Excellent. Like that one. There's a lot more where that came from. But I'm going to refer to you, I think you had Peterson here, but Peterson Toscano, I really admire his work. He's done a show called Transfigurations, which talks about gender variance in Torah and in New Testament and Christian scriptures. So in Mishnah, my particular area of study, Mishnah androgynous, which is androgynous is hermaphrodite, and the Mishnah is the first law code that was written was actually written down in Jewish tradition, and the idea is that this code was never actually used to govern a people, but that it was used to train rabbis. In very early days, and it was short and it kind of rhymes and has this mnemonic structure. So the idea was that it was the writing down of a formerly oral tradition. And this piece of Mishnah that I'm going to talk about is one of the longest single topic pieces of Mishnah that exists. And it's about this character who has both sets of genitalia and who is under the law, in some things treated like a man, in some things treated like a woman, in some things treated like both, and in some things treated like neither, which is an amazing framework to talk about gender variance in the Jewish community. So this being is obligated to, like men are obligated in manner of dress. So externally, this person would look male, but the idea is they menstruate and ejaculate. And so they have to do the things that apply to men and the things that apply to women. And there are limitations with how this person exists in the world, who they can marry, and who they can associate with. But in addition to the rules for this person, there's also a set of requirements, and this is the most fascinating piece. There's a set of requirements for the community to follow that reinforce this person's unusual identity. They don't let this person be forgotten as someone who is distinct from an ordinary man or an ordinary woman. That their both-andness may not ever be forgotten, which I think is singular and beautiful and helpful. So the community, by various actions, like a mother who gives birth to an androgynous, she would bring the offering for both a man and a woman to the temple. So that when the community sees her carrying a single baby, they see both the male and the female offering, and so they know that this child is different. I think that's really interesting. So the mainline scriptural and legal traditions contain compelling narratives of gender variance. Sadly, these narratives they carry little weight when it comes to real lives in real communities. Trans people are starting to do the work of remembering this part of the tradition, and that's our obligation to do that work, to remember the tradition and to carry it forth so that our communities can be just in their management of our lives. On the plus side, though, the presence of this tradition of gender variance is exactly what we require to build this new way of being around Jewish law. So how do trans Jews fare? Trans embodiments break Jewish law. You don't mix categories. The whole idea of kosher is not mixing milk or meat. In trans, you mix the category male with the category female. And when you come to the law, there is not a way to really do that. You can't render yourself sterile. Trans people render themselves sterile by taking hormones and by getting surgery. One may not dress in the clothing of the quote opposite unquote sex. And it's not considered cross-dressing when you're trans, but when other people look at this, they see it as cross-dressing, and that's against the law. The halakhic stance, the stance of Jewish law, position of Jewish law toward trans persons, presence of dual gender and, skip that. That's a little bit generic. Yeah. Okay, this is the one. So under Orthodox law, the majority opinion is that transsexuality is avera, sin, or boundary crossing, interestingly enough. A person who is visibly, recognizably transsexual or transgender would typically not be accepted as belonging to the gender into which they transitioned. Such persons would also cause distress and consternation in many, if not most, Orthodox synagogues. Some few of my acquaintance have been either granted permission and their rabbi has a lenient view, but the community life is still hard. And some people live in those communities, but they live stealth without ever being able to express who they really are. And that is hard. It's hard to live with that burden. Who might do well in a situation? Should you choose an Orthodox way of being trans? It's family-centric. So if you are past marriage age and your looks are fairly normative, you'll be more successful and sort of less harassed or expected by the community to participate in certain gender roles. There is a minority Orthodox position that says the person, if it is to save a life, then that person may go ahead and transition, and then they are accepted in the gender to which they transition. It is a minority opinion, but in Jewish law, the majority opinion holds sway, but the minority opinion is never lost. We carry them with us all the way from whenever they were originally written to whenever it is the time that we need to roll them out and say, we need this now. So the time is coming. The conservative halakhic stance is that a transsexual may be accepted into the gender into which they transition. However, there's a really nasty, sticky bit here. The conservative halakha actually has, it actually says, if you complete all of the surgeries, then you're accepted under Jewish law. For many of us, in fact, for most of us who identify as transsexual and many who identify as transgender, there's either no intention to have all of the surgeries, or there are some circumstance, like a financial difficulty, or life circumstances, or a million things that prevent a person from taking the final steps and meeting the requirements that the conservative movement would require for someone to actually be considered a member of the sex into which they transition. However, trans folk may become rabbis, they may marry, depending on who they're marrying and the law of the land. The reform stance, since halakha has a voice and not a veto, transsexuals and transgender persons are welcome. They may marry and become rabbis, and the stance for Reconstructionist Jews is similar. But there's problems, again, with when they marry and when they do Jewish things. Those gendered roles sort of, they keep rearing their ugly heads, and no one has really dealt with how do we deal with the betwixt and betweenness. Okay, so in Orthodoxy, it's relatively closed. In the liberal denominations, it's relatively open. There's some conditions. You may have heard the story of Joy Layden, who was Jay Layden, a professor at an Orthodox, the premier Orthodox rabbinical institution in the United States. And Joy had tenure and left, and then became Jay, and couldn't be asked to leave because she had tenure. She's amazing and a great inspiration for trans theological insight. If you read her work, she has a memoir out and poetry. Her poetry is extremely fabulous. So because of all of this difference, part of our job is to reach into the tradition and to look backwards and bring the old stuff forward, but also to read things in a new way. And Joy says, God left a little extra skin so that Jewish men could remove it and thereby perform a ritual in which their genitals become a physical sign of their true identity. From a trans perspective, she writes, this is a radical teaching. If an operation to alter genitalia is necessary to bring the male Jewish body into conformity with the Jewish soul, then God long ago acknowledged that medical intervention may be necessary for human beings to achieve their true identities. And Leah Moser is a rabbinical student who says, and I really resonate with this, the situation I find myself in is that of having to constantly negotiate the terms between the tradition and the self that seems to be constantly threatening to spill over the boundaries within which that tradition operates. It is not so much the violation itself that I fear as the possibility of finding myself in a place where the tradition cannot support me, nor I it. Tobaran Waxman is an artist of my acquaintance, and this is the picture of the standing prayer. It's Amidah in Hebrew, and this has happened in an art gallery, and it is mimicking Orthodox men davening, shuckling, swaying with prayer, and there's an image of a naked person in there whose genitalia are obscured. And to me, that speaks eloquently of the nakedness and the difference that is palpable when a trans person enters Jewish space. It doesn't have to be prayer space, but certainly prayer space. Jewish social space, it's kind of the same. Yep. So why do I do this work? Well, when I was putting together Balancing on the Mechitza, I received a submission from a young trans man who was in the process of converting, who was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and then had to research what would happen when he died. And when he asked me, I didn't know. And when I went to the authorities, they didn't know. And that really shocked me and scared me. And I felt like I really had to kind of push for, there has to be something. I'm going to die someday. I want this taken care of. Then I found a woman who happens to be in an organization called Kavod Ve'Nehum, Honor and Comfort, which is helping to bring about a resurgence in Jewish burial practice among liberal Jewish communities. And she happens to be married to a trans man. So she's thought about this stuff a lot. Why I do it as well? Because there's nothing like death to really bring bodies and bodies home, that this is a body thing. This is not about who you sleep with. Trans people aren't gay. I mean, some of us are, but I mean, that's not the thing. It's a different thing. And so it's a body thing, and death brings up this compassion that you can't ignore. This is a human being laid out on that slab. So Jewish burial customs. How are we on time? We good?
So far, so good.
Okay. Jewish burial customs. So this image is 1772 Prague that shows that Hever Kadishas, burial societies, have this long tradition. And so you see all of these men who are helping to prepare this body, and you see the men behind the partition who are reading Psalms while the body is being prepared. You notice it's men, all men, and they're dealing with a male met, or deceased. So today, in liberal communities, most Jews follow American burial customs. That means embalming, there's a viewing, there's often cremation, there's no end-of-life ritual other than a funeral or graveside memorial service. Orthodox communities and increasing numbers of liberal communities follow traditional Jewish burial practices based on the participation of community members in the burial society or Hever Kadisha. So there's a movement to reclaim the burial society and related Jewish traditions for progressive communities. Members of the Hever Kadisha who have received training in the ritual form and in CDC guidelines for handling blood and body fluids prepare the bodies. And it's gender segregated. Men prepare men's bodies and women prepare women's bodies. And currently in this community, it's being discussed what to do when trans people pass away, and what to do when trans people want to participate in gender burial societies. Would a trans woman be welcome in a women's Hever Kadisha? There's still, some bodies are cremated, and there's always a movement to kind of squash cremation in Jewish circles, but there's an acknowledgement that this is kind of the way of things. So sometimes people do cremate, and some rabbis, some Hever Kadishas, some communities are saying, okay, that's fine. And then green burial is another phenomenon that's up and coming, which is, to be as non-polluting and to allow the corpse to quickly decompose. So this work is something that's spiritually significant to the people who participate in it. And the belief in the tradition is that the soul is in the room as the body is being prepared. And angels guide us in our work. And it changes people who do it. People who learn this practice, they want to keep doing it because it opens your heart up. So, at the time of death, or as quickly as possible after death, there's a shomer, or a watcher, who sits with the body and recites particular psalms. And that's continuous from the time of death to the time of burial. And then usually in this day and age, at the funeral parlor, there is a tahara team. Tahara is ritual washing. It's physical washing and spiritual washing. It's the cleansing of the body and then the cleansing of the soul. The tahara team that takes care of this process is autonomous. They're not under rabbinic authority. This is really important, especially when we're talking about innovating with respect to the tradition. So when you die, you don't get to choose who is on your tahara team. There are people on the Hever Kadisha, and if they're available, they serve. And it's a great mitzvah to do this work because it is the mitzvah that can never be repaid. No one can ever say, hey, I'll do you when it comes around, because they're dead. And there's an obligation to treat the deceased with kavod or honor. So, there's this idea in our heads, here we are, dead and naked and exposed to these members of our community. And it's hard enough with surgical scars or a colostomy bag or the horrible disfigurement of a car accident, or those things are hard enough. But then when the men's Hever Kadisha team is preparing to work on a man and they discover female genitalia and they react with shock and chagrin and a lack of understanding of what to do, then you can see how that situation would be a not honoring of the deceased. There's a strong grounding, in addition to the autonomy of the tahara team, the idea of what goes on in the tahara room stays in the tahara room. The people it's just people. They have some training, but the people make mistakes. Sometimes, there's you can't walk in front of the person's head. It's considered dishonoring to walk in front of the person's head. If someone does that by accident, if there's some shame by a person who is looking at a disfigurement or horror or shock, that's an error. And so at the beginning of the rite, we say, the first blessing we ask is the blessing of the person, the deceased, whose soul is with us in the room, to say, please forgive us. We are human, we make errors. So, in general, there's no cremation, there's no embalming. Burial happens really quickly after death in the best possible circumstance. These days, you wait for family to gather and then you have the burial. There's no viewing, there's no makeup, there's no fancy dress. People are dressed in what are called tachrichim, or shrouds, which you see an example. There are some differences, but this is basically a kind of shirt thing and some kind of pants things, and or kind of a sheet that's kind of like a skirt. It depends. Communities do it pretty differently, a little differently. Men are buried in their prayer shawls down there in the lower right-hand corner. These days in liberal communities, of course, men and women use prayer shawls, and they may both be buried with their prayer shawl. We use a plain pine box, not a metal-lined casket or a cement-encased burial site. Soil from Israel is placed in the casket. Holes are drilled to facilitate decomposition. There's a brief graveside service with a eulogy by the rabbi. The casket is placed directly in the earth, and the Tahara team is responsible for washing and shrouding the body and putting it in a casket and sealing the casket. The family do not see the body. And then a period of mourning called Shiva may or may not follow. Progressive Hever Kadishas, historically autonomous. It's more important these days that they're autonomous and that there's no rabbinical authority. And these days, because of various circumstances, I just started a study group with an elderly woman who wants her sons to conduct her tahara. And in traditional circles, that would be forbidden. But in progressive circles, that would be possibly acceptable. But there is negotiation that must happen. You can't wait until you die and expect the community, if you want your body to be honored in a particular way, you have to take some steps now. You have to speak to the funeral director. You have to speak to your congregation. You have to speak to the members of the Tahara team. You may even select the members of the Tahara team. If you want a particular kind of Tahara team, the talk is going now that you can construct your Tahara team. That's against tradition, that's because it goes against the fact that anybody should be ready to step up and do it. So what do transgender people want for burial? To change kavod hamet, which is honor the body, the physical container for the divine. Instead of honoring the physical container for the divine just because it was a physical container for the divine, the honor to the life that physical container for the divine, what did the divine do when it was in that body? Yeah, honor that too. That's what trans people, in my opinion, are asking. And anyone, not just trans people, but anyone who wants to alter this ritual. Okay, so if you are transgender or intersex, it is unclear what will happen to you when you will die, unless you make arrangements beforehand. If you are female-bodied, likely, even if you identify as a man, likely women will watch over you and wash you. A controversy could ensue in the neighborhood of your dead body. If you are a transsexual and you have had all of your surgeries such that your genitalia are convincing and your community doesn't know your history, you may be prepared by the gender into which you transitioned. It can happen, but it might not. I went around asking, okay, there isn't a whole lot of experience that there isn't a whole lot out there. How many trans people have died and wanted to be honored in this way? Maybe some, but I haven't been able to find them. I heard of one funeral where a trans person was honored pretty much in a trans Jew was honored in pretty much an American sort of service, but there was a cantor who was trans who sang at their funeral. But I've never heard of anybody doing a tahara, a ritual washing. But I asked, what do people want? And this, of course, can vary from person to person. For me, I want a Tahara team that I want to make a distinction. For me, I don't care. For me, I don't care. But for my community and for the legacy of this tradition, I want a male Tahara team. But I want male to include cisgender men and transgender men. A trans woman friend, yes?
How are you distinguishing cis-trans and cisgender and transgender?
Say that one more time.
What do you mean by cisgender?
Cisgender is a person who does not have transgender experience, who is comfortable in the gender in which they were. There's congruence between their gender and their sex. What?
What you might say straight?
No.
No. So tell me more what you mean. Okay.
What did you say?
I said you can have gay men who are cisgender.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now I got you.
And you can have gay men who are transgender.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Non-trans? Okay. So a trans woman friend of mine who still has her penis wants to be prepared by the women's Tahara team. She considers her penis a penis, but what she considers that it does is it's not a woman's penis. How one of my trans male friends wants to be buried, a mixed Tahara team with humans of all sorts. Each of these pose challenges to communities who are used to this very sort of gender rigid kind of a situation. Even when there is a lot of innovation happening, their gender is, people go like this, they just close in. Some things you might want to think about that this brings into the resolution that asks these kind of questions. Rethink the category man to include men who were born female. Rethink the category woman to include women who were born male, using social roles as the basis of your expansion. It's only a partial solution because that deals with people who want to be congruent. Expand the understanding of the penis to include the constructed phallus and the male functioning clitoris. Expand the understanding of the vagina to include the female functioning penis and constructed vaginas. And once again, it's only the surface. Interpret halacha to support these notions using the model of the androgynous and other gender variant texts. And there are other ways to go through this. There's a category called, in business law, that's called, I don't remember the Hebrew word, but it's the same as, where goods are considered equivalent even though they're different. They're different actual things, but they're considered equivalent and placed in the same category by that token. There's no other way to do that in Jewish law. So it's like, it's a way in. It compares humans to goods, which is not a good thing. But, there are some ways that we can start to work with this really rigid tradition. Okay, let's see. Allow and justify ambiguity and category mixing however possible. In spite of a long history and tradition of gender segregation and rigid categories for man or woman, because of the confluence of circumstances around liberal Jewish communities and gay rights and transgender bodies, because of the relative autonomy of the Hever Kadisha, and because of the profound motivator of caring for our dead with compassion, there's a unique moment to engage Jewish ritual in ways that transform not only this ritual and the lives of trans Jews in the US, but also the whole idea of categories in the Jewish world. Obstacles. While progressive Jewish communities are welcoming in theory, They have never faced the idea that a person can claim a gender that is incongruent with the sex assigned at birth. In ritual, where the rubber meets the road, and everything is gender specific. For men to prepare my body for burial, they have to accept the authenticity of my life choices. They have to accept me as a man. They also have to respect my autonomy, my independence from all authority that claims otherwise. These are hard things for people who don't know their own tradition very well, who are relearning and still want to rely on a rabbi or other authority figure to show them the way. These are almost impossibly hard steps for people who understand creation as the separation of one kind of thing from another. To turn the category switch off long enough for something to move from one category to another is achievable. But to allow lines to blur in one place opens all lines to blurriness. When mixed gender or more inclusive male Tahara teams eventually happen, it will be talked about forever. It will become the story of my people. And that is not a bad way for transgender people of this generation to be remembered, by a people who still tell the story of Mount Sinai as though they were there. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes.
Noach, thank you. Thank you for a rich, rich presentation. You have woven together so much for us tonight, from text to tradition to interpretation to bodies and lives, to the personal and the communal and the transformative. And you've just, I'm holding on to all that you've woven. And I trust that my colleagues and friends here are holding on to that as well and weaving together questions as I am. So I invite us now into a time of questions, and I will sort of, I'll use this microphone. Thank you, Cooper. I will invite us to recall what Noach shared with us earlier, which is that he is hard of hearing. So I invite you to make sure that standing would be wonderful, and make sure that Noach can see you as you speak. So thank you, and please.
Oh, okay. I thought you were bringing the mic.
Yeah. Oh, I can bring them up.
I don't need to.
Let's do that.
Well, we have people streaming, so they can hear you if you use it.
Okay, that's fine.
Playful Donahue.
Thank you, Noach. In this presentation, I am a member of a Tahara team, and this is a subject very near and dear to me. One of the things that we didn't talk about here was the spirituality and the prayers and the psalms that are said while the physical tahara is happening. One of the issues I worry about, first of all, the prayers themselves are sexist, but what pronouns and what prayers are we going to use? That's a concern for me.
Okay, there are many options, starting from the idea that there would not be any change necessary in the traditional prayers, through writing original prayers of your own that serve the same function. It depends what, how you want to conform to the traditional ritual and the ways in which you choose to deviate.
And the ways you accept the life of the person you are honoring.
That would be my recommendation.
That's what ours is.
Is that what you do honors the person's life. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Well, here in Chicago, we have a progressive Heber Kadisha in cooperation with several of the liberal synagogues, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, and this is definitely going to, this is that little push that I needed to finally get training for it, but being trans, I've had all of my surgeries, and I realized that's a privilege that not all of us get because of the cost and other barriers we have. And so this is definitely something that we need to get honored no matter what our physical selves look. Our physical selves don't necessarily reflect the soul that we have. And so I'm glad we've got that.
Awesome.
I'm on the steering committee of the Heber Kadisha she's talking about, and so is Carla. And we've made an active decision that, the met or meta, whatever that person has declared and has lived their lives is how they will be honored. The one caveat we have is that we will let the members of the team know in advance. And if someone is uncomfortable with that, they have the option to say, this is not a tahara that I want to participate in, so that the honor can truly be there. And Violet, I look forward to your training, so you can be the first member of our PCK that is a known trans. However you want to word it.
Yeah. Awesome.
I've got the question that's coming to my mind.
I'm sorry, I can't see your mouth.
Sorry, the question that's coming to my mind is within Judaism, as I understand it, not only within the death rituals, but with other rituals as well, are very gender specific as well. I'm wondering about trans people who convert to Judaism, because there are, from my understanding, specific rituals for men who convert to Judaism as well as for women who convert to Judaism. So I was wondering if there was similar things going on within those rituals.
Yeah, the organization that I head up, which is, it's silly to call it an organization because it has no budget, but it is an, it is an organization. And the two areas that we work in are conversion and Heber Kadisha, because they're, coming in and going out. And, and they're both gendered, they're gendered gateways. So, yeah, that's the other area of consideration, yeah. And there absolutely are things to do that make these rituals welcoming.
Oh, I can make a comment about that if nobody else.
Is there a hand in the back? Oh, never mind.
So it seems to me it's so easy to perform kavanah, intentionality, in a performance or a pretend kind of way, to give the honor, the kavod.
Wait, I don't understand. Say it again.
The kavanah, the intentionality that might be in the tahara ritual,
Yes.
it's easy to perform it or to do it in an insincere way just to follow the practice. So what kind of theological risk might people be taking if they were to go through the motions without having the right intentionality? Is there any kind of disgrace that might be put on them for going down that route?
That's an interesting question. So I guess what I'm getting out of your question is there a way to monitor people's kavanah, or people's intention, as they perform the ritual?
Or is there pressure or motivation based on halakhic law?
There's absolutely pressure and motivation to act with the utmost respect and dignity for the person on that table. Kavod HaMet it's like the highest principle, the honor of the mate or meta, and gender neutral, however we want to conceive of that. That's the highest thing, is Kavod HaMet. Is there a police force? Not so much. Easy to go through the motions? I guess maybe, but I don't see it happening among any of the people that I've seen who do this work anywhere. Because ultimately, you're the one who's going to be on that slab. And you don't want anybody going through the motions. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Solomon.
What would a Taha team comprise of? A body that is unrecognizable in a bloody thing, in an explosion, or something similar to like that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? I'm not under...
What would a Taha team comprise of? A body that is unrecognizable, whether it's a female, it's a male, or a transgender, or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Solomon was asking what happens in the case of a body that is unrecognizable, whether that body appears male or female, but unrecognizable perhaps because of an accident or due to illness, etc.
People would base, the Tahara team would base, the body comes from somewhere with something attached, some history attached to it, and if there's no recognizable way to identify the person, my guess would be that they would default male in most communities, and that's problematic, but that's my guess. But it brings up the issue of, what happens when people are blown up and all that. Well, in Israel, they're like the best in the world at collecting tiny body parts, tiny bits of people, and separating one bit of person from another bit of person, no matter how small. Because all of you has to be, put in, if you bleed, you don't sop up the blood and throw away the rag. You sop up the blood and that rag gets buried with you. It's all of your flesh is sacred.
May I just say something to the gentleman that asked you about the police force? I just wanted to answer his statement about going through the motions. First of all,
First of all, the motions are teamwork, and people aren't talking unless they're praying or singing. That's it, and rarely singing. So all of your intention and all of your thoughts and all of your feelings are not visible to your team members. They're inside. And to the same extent that it's you and God, it's up to you if you want to go through the motions. Nobody's going to punish you. It's what you and God work out, is all I can say. It's a spiritual, private experience.
Thank you. I regret that we cannot continue this conversation here. You've clearly touched us deeply and raised many, many questions and thoughts, and there will be opportunity, of course, after our formal time together to continue talking with Noach, so please do take advantage of his presence with us here today. And again, please join me in thanking Noach. You have...
Thank you.
You have reminded us that we're not just here looking at texts, looking at ideas, looking at traditions, but we are real people engaging with those, engaging with other real people together. And so thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.